So you are still able to get all of the protein that everyone is, maybe not 1 gram per pound of body weight. That's not what we recommend, but you're still able to get all the protein that people are wanting you to get, but you're not triggering this cellular aging component.
All right, y'all, I'm here with Renee and Melanie, and I'm so excited to have both of them on together. And they just informed me they've never done an interview actually together, only separate. So this is so fun. Thanks, guys.
Yes, we're so excited. And a little fun fact is Melanie and I actually are old friends as well. We
Oh,
went to
no
school
way.
together. We got our master's degree together. We became dietitians together.
How
So there is a
funny.
history here.
I love that.
We're sticking close by. We like it.
It's so fun. Well, you must like each other a lot, so that's always good. Working
We do.
together with people that you like. I love it. Well, I'm excited about this conversation, kind of connecting plant-based nutrition and longevity. We've had, I've had guests come on talk about longevity. I've had conversations about plant-based nutrition, but putting this together, I think is just a really good perspective to take. So I would love to hear, and y'all can each kind of share your journey, but I would love to hear kind of y'all's journey into discovering this and like how much of an impact plant-based, if you're completely plant-based or, you can explain that part, but how that's impacted your life and your health.
I'll let Renee go first.
Okay.
Okay, absolutely. This is a topic that is so near and dear to my heart. I mean, my journey with nutrition started over a decade ago, and it actually started from going abroad. I did essentially a Doctors Without Borders, but the Canadian version because I'm Canadian, and went to Nicaragua, South Africa, and bounced around to provide medical care. And every time we would go, we would bring backpacks upon backpacks upon backpacks of medication. And it started to really hit me that, especially in some places and in some cases where the answer wasn't necessarily medication, it was lifestyle change, that things started to feel like we were possibly approaching this in a bit of a strange way, especially when we were going away after we'd be there maybe for a week out of the year, and then what the heck are they going to do after we're gone? And
Hmm.
so I started to explore this ability for nutrition and other lifestyle changes to make a really big impact on our lives. And once I started, peeling the onion, I just like couldn't stop. It was just the next page after the next page after the next page. And that's where I started my endeavor into becoming a dietitian, getting my master's degree, and specifically in longevity nutrition. So both Melanie and I are actually longevity dietitians, specifically with masters in health span. So not just living longer, but living healthier longer, and exploring that world. What are ways that we can support our health and longevity through nutrition? And turns out there's a lot of really cool ways and some things that you might not necessarily think of, but plant-based nutrition certainly being at the top of the list.
Hmm.
So that's my little quick story, not
I
so
love
quick
it.
story.
I know, such a good story. And side note, I had no idea you can get a degree in longevity. I find that completely fascinating. So I love that.
There's not a lot of opportunities to do so. In fact, USC, where Melanie and I both got our master's degree, is it might be the only one that is currently in existence,
That's
created
so
by
cool.
a leading researcher in longevity, Dr. Walter Longo. So,
Oh my
yeah, I'll
gosh.
let Melanie talk a little bit about it.
That's
I need to stop
amazing.
talking.
Yeah.
That's so good.
Yeah, Dr. Walter Longo founded our program, or was one of the people that founded our program. So it's definitely has a very very tight niche in longevity and health span.
Yeah.
Um, and also, P.S. Renee was pre-med for a long time. So the fact that she was pre-med and then went to dietetics
Oh
for
my
specifically
gosh.
to focusing on the nutrition
Yeah.
pathway is, I think, speaks volumes to the fact that we're in a stage of our world where chronic diseases that are lifestyle and dietary impacted by diet and lifestyle is so big. It's
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah.
But I've always had a love of nutrition. I just didn't realize you could make a career out of it until much later in my life. So I'm actually a career change. I used to be in healthcare PR for probably a decade prior to making my switch and going back to school. But I remember when you were asking the question, and since it's related to both Renee and the most impactful moment that I had that's really changed my tune on plant-based eating specifically was in Italy when we went to our a class that Dr. Walter Longo himself was teaching, and we were learning about proteins specifically, and just this class was epically hard. Oh my gosh, it was a wildly hard class, and I
Mhm.
remember just being it was almost like he opened a Pandora's box. I was like, what? How does this work? How do the mechanisms of action of protein work in the body? How does plant-based protein specifically work differently? It just really, especially coming from, I had a fitness background. Protein specifically was such a big, everyone's eating more protein. Everyone's
Mhm.
eating a pound per, or a gram per pound of body weight. And I just remember going to this class and thinking, oh my God, my brain blew up. My brain blew up. So since then, I would say that I've kind of dabbled in both. I've been high protein at one point in my life. I've been very low protein after this class at one point in my life, and I'm coming off of I just had a baby, so there's changes in what's required at different
Right.
stages of your life. You're going to need more when you're growing, you need more when you're older, and you also need more when you're pregnant and breastfeeding, but that, obviously changes. So anyways, we'll dive into all of this, but I remember because of our program, because of our class, and in large part because of the science that Dr. Walter Longo has led, has really kind of changed my perspective and my experience with plant-based eating.
Yeah, that's crazy. So were you both of you did you like after going through your degree and all that, was that what did y'all make a diet change? Like were you not plant-based and you went plant-based? Like how did that play a part in just everything that you learned? Renee,
For
you can go
me,
first.
for
Yeah.
me,
Oh, go ahead,
yes.
Melanie. You
Yeah, for
did.
for me it did. I wasn't I would say I was not, no, that's not true. I was definitely eating a lot of animal proteins at the time, trying to be a clean eater. That's the
Sure.
other thing about this whole conversation that I'd love to dive into at some point. But there's a difference between like healthy plant-based eating and unhealthy
Sure.
plant-based eating.
Yes,
So
for
we'll
sure. I always say that
dive into
Oreos can
that.
be vegan too, but like yeah, there's a difference.
Exactly, exactly. So I would say I have a proclivity towards eating more plant-based, but I was eating a lot more animal-based products and proteins at the time. This class shifted everything for me,
Yeah, yeah,
for sure. And
yeah.
also here I am working at a company that was founded by the man. So we're clearly I'm a big believer in it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we drink the Kool-Aid for sure.
Oh,
But in my on my side of things, I was already vegan. Like I had already been heavily plant-based prior to this. So this was just a nice like, cool, I'm doing the right thing.
Yeah. Confirmation.
But I did make a change. I did make a huge change, which was adding in time restricted eating
Mm.
and also adding in fasting mimicking into my life, which was something that I had never heard of. It sounded completely foreign, and it took a little bit of time really understanding the science before I even was able to get behind it. And once I did, that was my aha moment and my wow, this is something I absolutely need to do. Like I think both Melanie and I immediately after that class went and got fasting mimicking
a week,
diet sets
a
so
week
that
we
we could
return.
so that we and then never looked back like 15 rounds later. So that was for me the biggest change was
Mhm.
looking at how the time that we eat can also play a really big part, even beyond the foods that we choose when we're eating.
Well, can you dive into a little more about that and explain both of those, like the time part, and then if both of y'all have things to say about that, the time part, and then what the fasting mimicking is, because that's probably a new term for people. Like we know what fasting is, but this is a
Yes.
little bit different.
So I'll start just briefly by explaining what the heck fasting mimicking is, which is essentially the idea that you can get the incredible benefits of water only fasting, but with food. And so you can see now why originally I was like, what? No, absolutely not. That doesn't make any sense. But turns out 30 years of research later, there is a way to get our body to believe that we are in a water only fasted state while still eating very specific foods in specific amounts that let us kind of live below the radars that our cells are looking for food. So we can live below that amount, and we can have certain foods and have a far more enjoyable, safer way to fast while eating food and getting all those benefits. So that's fasting mimicking. Now, Melanie, I'd love to pass it to you to explain that second part of the question, which is, why fasting mimicking, and also,
the timing.
the differences in time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, to add one quick thing on the fasting mimicking piece that I think is probably the most critical outside of the cellular rejuvenation piece that the concept and the technology is making possible for people that otherwise maybe would never fast, right? But because it's supplying you with a specific, very designed amount of nutrients, type of nutrients, it actually bypasses the muscle and protein breakdown that typically happens when you follow, say, a water only fast, or even lots of other types of fasting. But because this technology is giving you a certain amount of glucose, a certain amount of protein, a certain amount of carbohydrates, you get into that keto state, the ketosis fat burning state, while protecting your muscle mass. So doing a fasting mimicking program is actually going to give you a different type of body composition, a different metabolic profile when you complete it than you would if you were following a water only fast, or even other types of food focused fasts or food focused programs. So that piece of it, I was, that aha moment for me too with the fasting mimicking diet was also really powerful and poignant. But our bodies, coming from an intermittent fasting lens, our bodies do very much work off of a circadian pattern, a circadian rhythm. All of our organs, tissues, and glands have a time of the day that they work most optimally, that they're most alive, most active. And following that pattern, which also happens to be a pattern that is akin to the sun. And when the sun is up and when it's daylight out, our bodies work better. And I think that one thing that has been a huge learning, a huge area of education too in our world, especially when it comes to what we're finding with the science, is a lot of people are intermittent fasting backwards. We're not feeding ourselves during very critical times of the day and waiting until 1 p.m., 2 p.m., sometimes later to have our first meal. And that is actually, we're still finding with people who are doing this, who may have had an initial weight loss or an initial, success on the program, that they're either their LDL's elevating, they're actually plateauing with their weight loss, they're maybe having other sort of metabolic issues simply because they're not timing their intermittent fasting the correct way. You should be eating first thing in the morning. You need that spike of cortisol first thing in the morning, and then you need to nourish yourselves during those most active critical hours, and then stop earlier in the day instead of the other way around. So that piece, when you think about especially when you pair that with plant-based eating, pair that with intermittent, or not intermittent, but periodic fasting mimicking programs throughout the year, that's the longevity plan. That's the plan that's going to keep your body, or support your body in maintaining a healthy status and longevity in the long run. So
yeah. It's so funny you're talking about this, because I literally recorded an episode last week about chronobiology, talking about your circadian rhythm and like optimal times to eat. So it's like, I'm just like, oh my gosh, I literally just talked about this. So I'm so glad you brought that up. It's back, yeah.
It means that you're on the right path.
That's right. It means
hear it more than
y'all
once. You're like,
listening
oh.
are supposed to hear this. So yes, so I
Yes.
love this. Okay, so I was gonna ask you, Melanie. So what was the thing that changed your mind to go more plant-based? What was the thing that you learned that was like, this is the reason for me that I need to go do plant-based?
Are you ready to get into a little science?
Let's hear it. I love it.
So
Let's
you
nerd out.
have to understand some of the science in order to understand. So when we were learning about this and the science that has come out even since, what's happening in our body is when you eat certain amounts of protein, whether it be, and this can happen with plant-based proteins as well, but it's predominantly animal-based proteins. So things like, beef, chicken, eggs, even dairy, into a certain degree. When you consume these foods, especially in excess, when you eat a lot of them, and most of us are consuming an animal-based product every meal, sometimes every, multiple servings within a meal every day. When you do that, when you eat animal proteins that way, it triggers we call them nutrient sensing pathways. Renee mentioned it earlier, these radars that our cells can use to detect how much food is present. There's a nutrient sensing pathway called mTOR that is triggered when we eat excessive amounts of animal proteins, especially. And the downstream effect of mTOR being activated is it actually activates IGF-1. IGF-1 is another nutrient sensing pathway that often is triggered when you eat carbohydrate foods. It's also happens to be a nutrient sensing pathway we track quite closely with things like diabetes and heart disease. Those two nutrient sensing pathways specifically they just when they're turned on, cellular aging accelerates. And it's not about, yes, we are living longer and longer lives, but this concept of health span versus lifespan.
Exactly.
We're living longer lives in bodies that aren't able to keep up with us. We're getting sicker and sicker at younger and younger ages. This dichotomy is so strange, right? And animal proteins accelerate cellular aging, so it makes our internal cells act older than we are in our physical bodies, in our biological age. And looking at the science, understanding how that works, how those mechanisms work, was powerful. And also taking it side by side and saying, okay, you're eating, for the sake of layman's terms, you're eating a ton of chicken versus you're eating a bunch of lentils in the same quantities, protein wise. Lentils weren't doing the same thing. They're not activating mTOR and therefore IGF-1 in the same way. So you are still able to get all of the protein that everyone is, maybe not 1 gram per pound of body weight. That's not what we recommend, but you're still able to get all the protein that people are wanting you to get, but you're not triggering this cellular aging component as you would with animal proteins. Do you want to add on that, Renee?
Yeah, I think just to recognize the important difference here is that Melanie mentioned mTOR and IGF-1 and how these, when activated excessively, lead to this excessive cellular aging, right? So that concept, I think we've got down. But to understand why animal protein and plant proteins are impacting that differently, we have to also understand that plant protein and animal protein are built differently with different building blocks. And that's why they trigger those things differently. And so it's not just like it's saying, oh, this is from an animal or this is from a plant. It's looking at the specific building blocks known as amino acids that make up protein. And it's saying, oh, these ones really trigger me to grow nonstop. And these ones are doing some growth, but not as much. And so it's allowing us to have this really healthy balance of giving us the protein, giving us those building blocks, but not excessively activating this cellular growth that can, if done too much, be problematic.
No, that makes total sense. Thank you for sharing the science of that, because I love being able to give people like the why. So this is great. Okay, so for those, and I would love to hear both of y'all's take on this, because I feel like, so I was like 100% vegan for like 12 or more years. And now I like dabble in a little bit of fish and stuff. So I'm like kind of pescatarian, but still like 85% plant-based. And I feel like we're in this scenario where we have like the hardcore like carnivore people and like the keto people, and then you have the plant-based people, and it's like this war. And I follow, like, I love having perspectives on all the things. So I see all this stuff on Instagram and I like hearing people debate and stuff, but because y'all are coming from a very educated place, like y'all have got degrees in this stuff to be able to back your reasons why you support, So I'd love to hear both of y'all, your perspective on kind of arguing, and you kind of just did, but kind of arguing the four plant-based versus, because I hear that from people too, where some people are afraid to go totally plant-based. Like, of course, it's like, where do I get my protein? But it's also like, oh, well, so and so said the carnivore has all these benefits, and this is so good for it, right? So I would love to hear y'all riff on that and just your perspective on that, each of y'all, whoever wants to go first.
For sure. I mean, I'm happy to take it. In terms of a carnivore diet, the research is not there. If you look at the research behind plant-based nutrition, it is extensive. And like, I think carnivore is really, it's just taking it to the absolute maximum so far. I mean, I can at least work around the ketogenic diet a little bit, because I think that within that population, they're recognizing the value of adding in vegetables, and they're recognizing the power of whole food. And I think that even in the carnivore diet, they are also recognizing the power of whole food. I don't think, if you look at the spectrum of all of the diets that are out there, you won't really find anybody who's like, go get a bunch of processed food,
Right.
and
Yeah.
that's going to be what you should do, right? So all of them are kind of on that playing field. So I think that's a good place to start. But then when we go to the carnivore, what I constantly hear as their reasoning to do it is that back in the day, that's what we ate. Which is not science, by the way.
Yeah. It's not true
That's not
either.
science. And it's
Yeah.
also, exactly, it's
Yeah.
also not true. And if we look at the largest history of our time as human beings, that was not how we ate, actually. It's only just been in the very, very recent future, because we've been around for millions and millions of years, that is how we've been eating. And I mean, if we want to go down the evolutionary route, sure, we can go there, and I'll still beat you on that argument. But unfortunately, that's not really science. Like, we need clinical trials, we need long-term studies to show that, and every one of those consistently shows that excess consumption of especially red meats are problematic for our health long term. So a lot, and there's also, just not to mention all the things that are missing if you
Right.
go down the carnivore route, like, oh my gosh, all of the antioxidants that you are missing, all of the fiber that you're missing, all of these incredible benefits of plant-based food are being completely lost. And the problem for our hearts are compounded when not only are you maximizing the intake of saturated fat, which is right now, it's certainly controversial, which I'm still surprised by the fact that that is something that's controversial, but whatever, we're just going to table that one. But also, like, not getting the benefits of fiber, which are
Right.
super heart healthy, and
And
all
gut
of them.
healthy.
Exactly. Like, all of these additional benefits that come from this that you're missing out on are just those are the ones that pain me. So I
Yeah.
try not to listen to too many of my carnivore friends stuff for too long, so that I keep my heart rate down.
I understand.
Yeah.
See, so we live in such a interesting field, because it is, everyone eats, so everyone fancies themselves an expert at
Sure.
all of the
Yes.
things that, especially, and it gets really emotional. People, the
Totally.
carnivore people and plant-based people too, actually get
Yeah,
really passionate
for
and
sure.
emotional about it. So it's kind of like, you have to approach them in a way that they understand, they don't feel attacked, or they don't feel like
Right.
their heart is being torn out because you're
Right.
personally attacking them on both sides of the spectrum. But the things, as a practicing dietitian, I think the things that I hear, the symptoms that I hear the most about people who follow more plant or carnivore heavy diets are twofold. One is that they claim that it feels better, that their gut is able to handle it better. So I have something to say about that. And also, I get a lot of conversation about people's body composition and how plant carnivore diets tout this type of physique that they're seeking. So first and foremost, 100%, if you have not built up a microbiome that is able to withstand the fibrous foods that are found in plant-based diets, you aren't going to tolerate that well. You are going to tolerate probably a more animal-based protein diet better. That doesn't mean that that's innate to who you are. That's your microbiome not being, probably being slightly unwell and
Right.
imbalanced, and you should probably take a look at that and ease into that. And also, you can't go from 100% meat only or what have you, and then 100% plant-based over.
Yes.
You are absolutely going to have diarrhea. You are
Yes.
absolutely going to have digestive
Bloated.
upset.
Yeah.
100%, you're going to feel terrible.
Yeah.
That the same is true with, getting your water intake up. You don't go from 0 to 100 overnight.
Right.
So there is an element of, that argument of my body feels better, my gut feels better, doesn't really play very well, because it's anytime you make a massive shift in your diet from one to the other, you aren't going to be balanced right away.
Right.
It's going to take time, and you do need to work with somebody that understands this concept and this process to be able to get you there in a way that's, the least problematic. Like, that bloat, giving you the tips and tricks for how to make plant-based proteins better, right? Soaking your legumes, doing all these things to get those phytates off that are some of the biggest problems with, bloating and gas. So there's an element to that I think carnivore people don't really understand, or maybe aren't looking into, because they do feel better. Also, there's the body composition piece. Like, on the one hand, I think, the conversation, it gets a little convoluted with people who are talking about how they've been able to shred all this weight and get this type of body. But something that is never really defined is, what is your goal? If your goal is to live in a healthy body, plant-based, having more plants in your diet is going to be optimal. That doesn't mean avoiding meats altogether necessarily. Including some fish is actually quite recommended. Including animal-based proteins a couple times a week, maybe a couple times a month. That's going to be maybe okay for you. So it's not a all or nothing necessarily thing. There's something to say about that too, but you aren't going, if longevity is your goal, it's this route. If having a specific body composition that is, by the way, contrived and societally developed anyways,
100%.
then yeah, you may have more luck in a faster way with a carnivore diet. But I think that's the thing, is we're talking, people say the word, oh, I'm getting healthy, but they don't differentiate what their goals in health are. And I think that's an important distinction to make, that if I want to be able to hike until I'm 95. That's my goal. So I'm going to choose the lifestyle that helps me get there. But if my goal is to join a bikini competition, or to, lift, a certain amount of weight in this, not that you can do it on the other side either, but if my goal is that, then okay, yes, that might suit me better. So I think it's health. Your definition of what health is a really big contributing factor in this conversation.
Yeah. No, I think 100%. Well, and I think sometimes too, people think that they can define health just on looking at you. And just because somebody's ripped and jacked doesn't mean that they're healthy on the inside. So I think that's another thing to remember too, that like body mass and body composition isn't necessarily a metric of health. Like, yes, it's a contributing factor, but it's not the only metric of health. And I think sometimes we get blinded by that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And not to discount the fact that you can't achieve those things with a plant-forward
Totally.
diet.
There's plant-based bodybuilders and bikini competitors and
Olympians. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So I mean, just the fact that it's available to you to get there with plant-based nutrition as well. I mean, that to me is so exciting to think about. And I mean, if you're trying to hack the system to get there faster, I mean, to me, that's always like a bit of a yellow flag, at least. Like, if I'm doing this 10 times faster, there might be some downsides to this speed.
Right.
And there's also science to back that up too.
Yeah,
but
no, for
just
sure.
Like logically, it's kind of nice to think about it that way.
One really quick note, because I don't want this to like get thrown under the rug either. And I know Renee has something to say about this too, but There are, so I already hear people saying, well, wait a minute. Being too low a protein is actually not good either.
Yeah.
So I just want it. So the one thing about vegan vegetarians who are incredibly strict and potentially not that good at balancing their foods, having too low a protein in your diet will actually also accelerate cellular aging too.
Yeah.
So we talk about it in a bell curve format. Like you don't want too much, you don't want too little. You need to stay right in this really beautiful balance. So, getting anything below zero point 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight a day, per kilogram, not pound, per kilogram of body weight a day is also something that you need to be conscious of. I work with a lot of patients who are gung ho. They come to me like, I'm going plant-based, I'm doing this thing, and then aren't proficient in the kitchen, don't understand how to plan a plate, are going to Trader Joe's and getting all their processed food. Not that I love Trader Joe's, but
Yeah.
like getting, they're doing it wrong and maybe not doing it the most whole way.
Yeah.
That's a problem too. So yes, we I just wanted to call that out as a little caveat because I can already hear people talking about, and I want to make sure we're very clear that we're not saying that low protein is better, like no protein or low protein is
Right.
better. You need to have protein is used for amino acids are required for quite literally every process in the
Everything.
body.
Yeah.
Every single process in the body requires some form of amino acids and protein. So we're not saying that either.
Yeah. And on in that same vein is we're also not saying that muscle isn't important
Yeah.
because muscle is such a critical organ to our health. And, I think a lot of the time we think about muscle in that, like, how good do we look and how strong do we look? Or how much can I lift at the gym, which, okay, sure, that's part of it. But muscle also plays into our immunity. It plays into all of these other things in our health. And it also plays into healthy aging. So that bell curve applies also to the muscle composition that you have. You don't necessarily want too much of it either, but you definitely don't want too little of it. And you certainly don't want to be frail. And we see that in longevity studies is that muscle maintenance and composition is so important for longevity. And in today's world, unfortunately, and actually this is just unfortunately the way that our bodies are, but from the age of about 30, we start losing about 3 to 8% of our muscle every decade. And then when you go up to the age of 50, it increases even more to like 8 to 10% of your muscle being lost. So it's such a careful balance, and it's something that we have to be careful and mindful of, that we are protecting, because it's going to naturally be lost. And so we have to make sure that we're being mindful of that. And part of that is even more than nutrition. It's also about weight bearing exercise. So you can eat all the protein you want, but if you're not pairing that with weight bearing exercise, your muscle isn't really getting much benefit at all. In fact, it'll probably just be reused and thrown into fat stores because that's what our body does. When it doesn't need it, it doesn't use it, it doesn't have a place for it to go, it'll just funnel it to your fat.
Right. Yeah, for sure. No, thank you for calling that out, because I do think that both of those points needed to be made, everybody listening, and I do, I like what you said about everybody getting emotional about their way of eating, because I think the other thing too is people think that, and I'm such a huge proponent of bio-individuality, and I think so many people are like, well, it worked for me, and I feel all these
And
things and all
therefore,
these things fixed, so it has to work for you. And it's like, well, no, it doesn't really work that way. But so I think it's important distinction to make too, that like not everything, like it's also very individual. And I like that you call it too, like, yes, maybe you include some fish or some meat every now and then or whatever, but I think the plant forward diet is like basically the point that y'all are trying to make, like leading with that. And so before we wrap up, because I could talk about this for the next 3 hours, honestly, I have so many more questions that I would want to ask you. But if y'all have just kind of some big like facts to spew at people about in terms of longevity and plant-based, like, and you talked about kind of the difference between a more like animal-based, kind of the science behind that. But just for the people listening, just people like to hear the facts, right? Of why am I living longer with plant-based? Like, what are some of the big facts that y'all could spit out just for people as we wrap up about longevity why we should include more plants in our diet.
Melanie, take it away.
Mhm.
Oh, man, so the very first fact that is actually on a fasting mimicking side of things. Well, I actually have two, um, but they're both related to fasting mimicking because we're both Renee and I are like heads down with this particular with the actual research here. Um, if when you combine a plant-based eating, well, it's actually just with fasting mimicking diet specifically, but I like to say that this is even more complementary when you focus on a plant forward diet. I really appreciate you saying that. It's plant
Mhm.
forward. It's not, yeah, we
Yeah.
want you to eat more of them. I eat
Yeah.
more plants and swap out some of those proteins every now and again. But if you, from the fasting mimicking side of things, when you follow a fasting mimicking diet 3 consecutive months in a row, you can potentially reduce your biological age, which is the age of your cells, by 2.5 years
Oh, wow.
in those 3 first cycles. And that's really important because, again, we're not talking about when we have the plant-based conversation, we're not, the muscle thing aside, the body composition aside, the, ancestral eating aside, all of that aside, we're talking about how do you live your healthiest for the longest period of time. That's a really important statistic because it's actually how old are your cells? I don't
Hmm.
care how old you are. I mean, I can look at certain people that are 65 and they look 30, and some people
Hmm.
are 30 and look 65. But we're talking about cellular aging there. So that's one really interesting point. And obviously when we're talking about fasting mimicking, what you do in between time is plant-based, plant forward eating. And then the other component that's really interesting is we put out a study last year, Renee, maybe the year before, on the comparison between the Mediterranean diet, which is
Last
another
year.
diet that we actually really love.
Hmm. Yeah,
It's plant forward. It's
it is.
high polyunsaturated fat forward. It's really wonderful for heart health. But even when you compare that to the fasting mimicking diet, toe for toe, doing 4 cycles of the fasting mimicking diet versus 4 full months of the Mediterranean diet, it had the same impact on heart health management, heart health in general, but it was actually superior in muscle protection too. So anyway, it's not directly related to the plant-based, but it's statistics that I think are really powerful that
Yeah.
complement the plant-based eating that we've been talking about.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you mentioned the Mediterranean diet. I don't know if y'all watched, I'm sure y'all did, the documentary about the blue zones, and have a couple of his books. But that I think, and me and my husband were watching it, and I'm like, people can argue all day long about the carnivore, this, that, whatever. But like this guy was going to the blue zones and people that were like 100+ years
Yes.
old
And
that
rocking,
are, yes, that
rocking.
aren't just like sitting in their chair all day. They're like climbing steps and carrying baskets and like living their best life at 120, whatever. And it's all of the blue zones are plant forward. Some of them are completely plant-based, like the Seventh-day Adventist, or yeah. But
Yep.
it's like, I don't know how you can argue that. It's like we have evidence of these people living for forever. Anyway, that just, to me, I'm like, there's just no, the evidence is there. Like, I don't mean, the science aside, science is important too, but it's like
The,
these
the the
people are
living
evidence.
proof, the
Yes,
living
The
proof.
living.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well,
Yes.
what I love about the blue zones too is that it really does consider the whole being and the whole lifestyle.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
more than nutrition. Like, and also not to mention the vast majority of those groups either had periods of their time where there was a long period of fasting,
Mm,
whether it was due to war or what have you, that forced
Religion.
them to religion, what have you,
hmm.
that forced them to fast during long periods of time.
Hmm.
So also just a note there, but then not to mention community. I mean, that
Hmm.
is such a big part of that.
Yes.
And so it's this multifactorial, multi-method way of supporting health and longevity. And so I really like to be reminded of that because we're not always going to be perfect. We're not always going to be able, and as much as Melanie and I are going to sit here and say that we know everything that there is to know about nutrition, we have still so much to learn. And so if we can tackle at least things at a few different angles, if we can say, okay, well, I'm just going to focus on building a really strong community and support,
Mm.
that is still going to be really impactful. And if Instead, today I'm going to focus on exercise and focus on moving my body. Cool, amazing. Who cares if I have one bad day of eating? That is okay. That's why I love the blue zones and love the concept of blue zones, because it really is taking into just so many considerations.
Yeah, for sure. That's important.
But in terms of because there's so much research on plant-based nutrition, I actually want to take it like a bit of a step back and just say that the research on plant-based nutrition is covering so much ground. There's research on Alzheimer's, there's research on type 2 diabetes, there's research on gut health and IBD and IBS. I mean, really, like it spans the gamut. And I think that what we can learn from this is maybe not that we, again, know everything, but that we recognize that there is just this intrinsic value to plant-based nutrition. And trying to figure out exactly what it is and exactly what molecule it is actually kind of taking away the point here. It's that these foods, we've been eating them for a very long time, and our body has really learned to take advantage of them and without picking apart every piece, thrive with them. And that's why it can kind of tap into so many different parts of our health, whether it be our brain health, our heart health, our gut health. And so it's just, if it sounds like our audience is probably leaning towards plant-based, so we may be preaching to the choir here, but if you haven't yet, just like pick a topic that is interesting to you for your health and just start exploring that. For me, it was Alzheimer's and dementia, and just really digging into the research and looking at all of the different aspects of our brain health and how those can be impacted by plant-based nutrition in ways that you might not necessarily think. Because you eat a high fiber diet, suddenly it helps with your appetite. Suddenly you're also changing the amount of food that you eat. It changes your palate and the type of food that you're predisposed and preferring to eat. So I'm just kind of like playing around in the world and understanding all the ways that plant-based nutrition can support our health in different ways, I think is just worth doing.
Yeah, no, I love that because there is so many rabbit holes you could go down with the research in
Yeah.
different directions. So find the one that supports you on your journey. I love that. Yes. Okay, like I said, I could talk to like forever on this, and I won't do that to everybody. Yes, so we'll stop there. I do have another question I want to ask both of y'all, but I know people are going to want to know more about the intermittent, what is it called?
Intermittent fasting,
fasting
mimicking.
Mimicking. Yes, I couldn't think of the word. So people are going to want to know more about that. So if y'all want to share where they can learn more about that and y'all and everything y'all are doing and yeah, all the things.
Absolutely. So if you are curious to learn more about fasting mimicking, also even plant-based nutrition, because we have a new plant-based protein powder, for example, that is incredible and longevity focused. But anyway, if you're curious about some of those things, you can check it out at prolonlife.com. That's Prolon life.com. If you are, like we said, we really just scratched the surface here. So if you have more questions and you want to connect with Melanie or I, easiest way to reach me is on Instagram at Fitton Nutrition. That's Fitton Nutrition. And Melanie, I'll let you share yours.
Yeah, my Instagram is health and mellness. So that's HEALTHNMELLNESS. And I also just want to call out to Prolon Life is if you are in a preventive state, if you are wanting to just elongate and elaborate on your current health goals. We also do have a medical division for anybody that's currently suffering from metabolic disease, diabetes, and that's actually called L-Nutra Health. L-nutrahealth.com. So we actually have programs designed to actually work with dietitians, work with medical professionals, do laboratory testing, that kind of thing. So we have two sections. One is kind of a self-service, preserve your health, maintain your health. And the other is if you have a pre-existing chronic health conditions, then go look at lnutrahealth.com too.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank y'all for sharing that. Of course, all the links will be in the show notes, so y'all can go check that out. And I know everybody's going to be going to see what they can find there to help them live longer and better. And I love too that I think both of y'all, there's a difference between health span and lifespan. So I think
Yes.
that's important to end on. So the last question I want to ask each of y'all give y'all a chance to answer, that I like to ask everybody at the end. What do you think is the most important thing you can do to live with purpose?
Mm.
Live with purpose. That's a really important question. I think I'll go first, Melanie.
Please.
But for me, living with purpose is honestly just spending time internally, just listening to myself and giving myself a moment to think about what is important to me in that moment, and really disconnecting from thinking about everybody else. Because look, I am living with purpose. And I think initially, actually, what I initially thought when you said living with purpose, it was, my husband, my family, all my friends, that was going to be my answer. And immediately I caught myself, because it is really, really easy to always be thinking about everybody around you. I think especially as women, we like to take responsibility for everybody's health and wellness and well-being. And I mean, we're dietitians, for crying out loud. It's literally our job to care about everybody's wellness. But also recognizing that it's important to go within and to have a moment for yourself and think about what you need, and go with that as guiding you forward.
I love that. So good.
Heck yeah, Renee.
Yeah.
I would second that. To take it a little bit further, because I also think that that's 100% living with purpose is being honest, being true to what you want, and part of that is being honest about what you're feeling, your emotional literacy. But I talk a lot about in my work, I talk a lot about how you can. We're living in a society right now where we have not learned what body literacy is, what emotional literacy is, and like we think we are feeling something and we actually haven't integrated it, we haven't thought about it, we haven't figured out where it's coming from, where it's rooted from. A lot of us are living in very victim oriented lifestyles where we think everything's happening to us and not for us. And anyway, I do a lot of work on helping people tap into their body literacy, because it's one thing to say listen to your gut, but your gut's super anxious because your food and your nutrition's not well, right? So there's an element of body literacy that I talk about a lot with in order to live with purpose, you have to be honest, and being honest is really getting to the root of what makes you tick, what's happened in your life that has gotten you to where you are today. And that honesty and that real courage to really sift through your own onion of, being truthful and vulnerable in your own life, to really sift through that is, I think, one of the quintessential ways of living with purpose. And part of that is starting with your body, and figuring out how your body's talking to you, and figuring out how you can better honor what's happening with yourself.
What it's telling you. Yeah, I love that. Such good answers, ladies. This is so good. It's such a good note to end on. Feel empowered. I love it.
That's
Thank
what we
y'all.
want. That's what we're here for.
That's
I
right.
know.
I love it. Thank y'all so much. This is like, it's like a party. I feel like we could
It
spend
was a
another 2 hours
party.
on it. So thank y'all for,
So could I.
yeah.
Let's stick around.
Let's keep going. This is so good. Thank you for the work that you're doing. It's so impactful and so powerful, and you're helping all of us live better and longer. So thank y'all. Thanks for spending
Thank you,
some time.
Hope, for making it possible. We
Yeah.
appreciate it.
So much fun. Thank you for having us.